Right, Elsie, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited about our conversation, more so out of personal interest too, but just wanted to explore this whole notion of you see this polarization between capitalism and socialism, and it's obviously become a huge debate, and especially with the US presidential election coming up, there's a lot of focus on it as well. And we tend to see it quite a bit. And I would say, personally, based on my understanding of history, this has really come to the forefront over the last 200 years with Karl Marx coming in and obviously sharing his thoughts around the downsides of capitalism. But I'm hoping to talk through all of that with you today. But before we jump into that conversation, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself and what's brought you here today.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for having me. So, my name is Elsie Gilmore, and I actually grew up in a small dairy farm in a very small part of the US in the state
Mhm.
of Vermont, which was a very interesting way to grow up, a much different perspective than many people my age
Mhm.
did. But over the years, I became very passionate about different issues, one of them being the environment, and then just a lot of other issues. And the more I thought about these issues, the more many of them came back to capitalism as being the cause of them, the root cause of them, right?
Yeah.
From the environment to poverty to housing issues, they all came back to capitalism. And capitalism being done really badly or
Mhm.
really well for some people, but
Right.
really badly for other people. And so that kind of that's one of the things that led me to write the book I just wrote, which is called How to Find Joy in a Capitalist Hellscape, because I think this is a hellscape for a lot of people, and it isn't for a small number of other people.
Mm.
So that's how I ended up on your show today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And just to get things sorted out here, when you and I chatted briefly before, you mentioned that you don't necessarily want to just throw capitalism under the bus. There's good things and bad things to it, as with anything, and it's finding that healthy balance. I just want to make sure that's still your view and that's something you stand by.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when I say capitalism, I don't mean every single form of commerce.
Hmm.
I'm not talking about small businesses or artists or artisans or
Hmm.
authors or any other small economic models like that. I'm talking about the system of exploitation of workers and exploitation of the earth's resources. And no, I don't think we should throw capitalism out the window, but I think many places, for instance, in Europe, have a much more blended system
Hmm.
that has capitalism, but also cares about people, which capitalism doesn't care about people. It only cares about money.
Hmm.
So I think that's the part that we really need to work on in the United States.
Hmm. So, what I'm hearing from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, essentially the issue is really with the corporate side of it, right? That's
Yes.
more of a problem because, to your point, the focus is really on growing and focusing on resources rather than the people who are doing the work. And to your point, even the earth as a resource is being exploited. So I could definitely get behind that. So let's maybe understand what are some of the issues you're seeing if we kind of started getting a bit more granular in terms of what you've been able to experience and what you've identified as certain issues.
In the US right now is housing.
Mm.
And one of the reasons it's an issue is because huge investment companies like BlackRock and Vanguard buy up single family homes. And so in some areas, they've bought so many homes that they're controlling the market price in those
Right.
areas. And so also those are single family homes that now people can't buy, and that no one could bid against a huge company like that because they'll pay with cash, right? So they'll undercut anyone who's trying to buy that house.
Right.
instead of them. And so now we have corporate owned housing,
Mm.
right? And we have a lot of homeless people.
Yes.
And it's a pretty straight cause and effect of
Hmm. Yeah.
contributing to our housing issues here.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're definitely seeing a similar issue in Canada. Housing prices are skyrocketing. We're definitely in a crisis here to the point where, yeah, not many people can afford it. And they get stuck because with inflation, rent continues to go up and housing prices continue to go up. It's really hard for a lot of people to figure things out. And I think that's where, to your point, in the US, perhaps you're seeing the homeless population growing because they just can't afford a home in general, whether it's renting or buying.
Yeah, and in the US, some of these corporate owners of all these houses are being sued because they were actually using a piece of software that was the equivalent of price fixing. So again, it's for them it's not just about inflation, it's
Hmm.
about what is the absolute most money I
Hmm.
can get for this property, whether it's really worth it or not. Once the supply goes down, they which they contributed to, then they really have a lot of control.
Hmm. So, one of the reasons that's given to us economically is inflation. And to target inflation, we need to raise interest rates. Now we're hearing rumors of rates coming down. So do you suspect that inflation will continue to rise?
The price increases we've seen are not all inflation,
Hmm.
because we've seen that corporations are making record profits, right?
Mm.
So they're not just raising the cost to cover their extra costs. They're raising them way more, right? Because they look around and they see other prices going up and they're like, "Oh, this is a great time. We can do this now and call it inflation." I don't think so. Inflation can slow, which I think it has already,
Mhm.
but it's never going to go back because that would be deflation, right? And that would be very unusual. So I don't see prices, although a few companies, like I think Target might have been one of them,
Mm.
they just kept raising their prices. And finally, their customers were like, hey, oh, we're not going to buy your stuff anymore. So they lowered them again. So if they're able to lower them, obviously they raised them more than they needed to.
Yeah,
So there's just a lot of that going on right
right.
now, I think.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, to your point, if the bar's already been raised, it's hard to bring it down unless, yeah, there's pressure from the consumer, but
Yeah.
that doesn't really happen a whole lot if prices are high everywhere, right? So there's no comparison to understand.
Right. But that is a great example of how much power consumers have that they don't always use.
Mhm.
There are way more of us than there are of
Right.
corporations. So we have so much power. And when we all work together, we can use that as leverage. And part of my book talks about the fact that there's so much infighting
Mm.
among people that it sometimes makes it hard for us to use that power
Mhm.
to accomplish things.
Yeah. Do you feel then, this might be an interesting question, but do you feel that the infighting or the divide is by design then to,
Oh, absolutely. 1000% it is by design. Yeah. Capitalism does not want us to all realize that they're the problem, right? And that we, they create enemies um, so that we'll be distracted from what they're doing. I'm trying to think of a good example, but they will blame everyone. We're all so angry. And so we're angry at immigrants, right?
mm,
That's a huge one that I feel definitely comes from capitalists.
mm,
Uh, Blame immigrants or blame anyone who's different than you, right?
mm.
So that we'll just keep fighting while they are draining our wallets.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. So you've talked about the housing crisis. What are some other consequences you're seeing with the way things are being managed right now?
Low. It would not, you'd have to have three jobs if you're working minimum wage in the United States just to pay your normal bills and not do anything else. So
Mm,
our minimum wage is, our federal is $7.25. Adjusting for inflation over the years, it hasn't been raised. So especially with all the inflation we've just had, it should probably be almost $30 an hour just to pay, just to live a normal, no frills life in
mm.
most places in the United States. So that's a huge issue. And so inflation wouldn't matter as much if the wages kept up with it,
Mhm.
right? And just the arguments, it's all this social media and the media just push these arguments that capitalists throw out. If we pay people a living wage, then your hamburger will cost $10, or just this absurd stuff, which, if you look at the history of this happening in other places, that's not true at all.
Mhm.
So again, they're convincing us so that we will fight about who's right about how much your hamburger is going to cost if
Mhm.
we pay the person who makes it enough to actually live.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and to your point, and if you again draw in the housing issue, like if you can't keep up with your bills and you're drowned, then you're constantly, to your point, working and you're not even aware of what's going on around you
Yeah.
to even to
Nothing else
figure out if
matters.
yeah,
Yeah, nothing matters if you can't buy food.
right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. So again, because using housing as an example, if you somehow end up getting a mortgage, you're just trying to keep up with those bills that you never get ahead, right? It's just a
yeah,
treadmill.
I don't really think there's a difference between renting and owning right now,
Yeah.
especially in the state I live in, Florida. Our taxes have gone up a ton, and part of it is because so many people have moved here and all the housing prices have gone up, so now you pay more in taxes, but
Mm,
also the insurance here, because we get hurricanes, which will just destroy your whole house, and with climate change, just normal rain events here are so heavy that things are flooding now that never flooded.
mm,
So, owning a house in Florida right now might be more expensive than renting,
mm.
which is crazy.
Yeah, there are certain situations like that here too. Like I said, I see that quite a bit where it is cheaper to rent than to own because people often just look at owning to like a mortgage, but there's other expenses that come with owning a house, taxes,
Absolutely. And
utilities,
you
and
guys have fires.
yeah.
What else? Is that your biggest natural disaster up there?
It depends in yeah, like where I am, yes, forest fires is a
Mhm.
huge issue, and obviously a lot of communities get affected. So there is that risk as well. Yeah.
If you own a house. And so if you rent, some of that expense does get passed on to you. But
Yeah. So the argument with taxing the public is we're spending money for you, right? That's the idea. There you get benefits. What are your thoughts around that, right? There's that whole carrot that gets thrown around, and I see a lot of issues with it personally. With free healthcare in Canada, that's like a huge selling point. But if I were ever to use it, then I'm having to wait 9 to 10 hours, and the system is so bogged down that I'm probably not getting the quality of care that I would want anyways. And then for someone like me who doesn't necessarily, fortunately enough, need to use that service, I'm still paying for it. Yeah, it's an interesting one.
just know you'll eventually need that service. But as far as that's concerned, I do feel like, and maybe there already is, but I think a hybrid model, like everyone should have basic health care.
Mhm,
Like you should never feel like you can't go to the doctor because you can't afford it. People here go bankrupt because of medical bills. That's
mhm,
horrifying. I don't think anyone should make money.
mhm,
And could it be improved? Yes, but I don't think corporations should be making money off our sicknesses. I think that's disgusting. So even like here in the US, some people who have insurance have a terrible insurance plan. So they could still end up paying tens of thousands of dollars a year, even with insurance. And it prevents people from seeking care. And so so even if there was a hybrid model where you could get better health insurance for more money, maybe that's the answer. But then again, that's pitting poor people against rich people again, right? So the rich people get all the good health care and the poor people don't. I'm not super in favor of something that is has that effect.
mhm.
I don't know what the answer is. Ours is imperfect, yours is imperfect. I just actually did a podcast with someone in UK. She said theirs is imperfect. It's probably much like yours. So, I don't know. I don't think anything that's necessary for us to live
Hmm.
is something that corporations should be making money off of.
No, I agree. So we've
Yeah.
talked about some of the downsides with respect to capitalism. What are some of the benefits from your perspective?
I think the benefits of capitalism, even like people talk about the innovation, okay?
Mhm.
A lot of that innovation is actually paid for by our government.
Right.
And then the company gets to take the credit for it and
Yeah.
make money off it. Even though I paid for it because I am the government, right? Through my
Hmm.
taxes.
Hmm.
And you had mentioned taxes, going back to that. I think we should go back to FDR level taxes when in the US, the marginal tax rate for a certain amount of wealth was 90%, right? Because when you really think about it, to make that much wealth, you have to use a lot of resources, common resources that all of our tax dollars pay for. I think that's very fair. And I think if you want to live in a community, like a country is a community, right?
Hmm.
And a government is are the people who take care of everyone in that community. I
Hmm.
think there should be a minimum standard of living for every single person, right? Or why are we even doing this? What's the point of it? So that's how I feel about taxes. And I think people with less money should pay less taxes, right?
Hmm.
And I don't believe that people who aren't super wealthy are lazy. I don't think they're stupid. I think they're super wealthy. You somehow are taking advantage of people. And I truly believe that with every fiber of my being.
Hmm.
Because all the people that work for your company made your company, right? They
Hmm.
make all the money for your company.
Hmm.
So when you make a ton of profit and they don't, you've taken the value from their work
Right.
and kept it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 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 I guess one of the arguments I could see there, and I don't know how valid it would be, is that as a company, I'm also creating opportunities and jobs for these individuals, which may not be there otherwise. And then, yeah,
Sure.
yeah,
Yes, but also you created those jobs to make money for yourself.
right.
So you didn't do it selflessly, right?
No, no, absolutely. Yeah. And then the other piece I hear, the other argument I hear with higher tax rates is if I'm, for example, if I'm competent and I've established myself to a certain point, why should I get penalized for it? Because there's that other argument also when it comes to.
But again, as I said, in order to do any of that, you have to use resources that
Hmm.
don't belong to you, like the roads and the
Hmm.
post office and the water, all the things that everybody's taxes pay for,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of how I see it. Um, so there's a thing called the commons. It's
Yeah.
supposed to be all the stuff that we all own together. But the tragedy of the commons is that when you tell everyone that they can use part of it, some people will use 90% of it.
Mm.
And so that's why you can't just let everyone decide how much of it to use
Right.
because they'll use all of it. A few people will use almost all of it.
Yeah. Do you feel then it would limit people from feeling incentivized to innovate or grow because if someone to your point isn't using the resources then they would just remain untapped, for example,
But
right?
let's talk about where we would set the marginal
Sure.
tax rate of 90%, right?
Yeah.
Like a billion,
Mhm.
500 million. Like, how much money do you have where any more money than that, you wouldn't even be able to spend,
Mhm.
right? There
Mhm.
was this little video that went around on social media, and this guy showed up at the bank and he said his account was frozen from putting any more money in it. And the woman said, "How much money do you have in it?" And he said, and he whispered because he didn't want anyone else to hear, he said, 50 million. And
Mhm.
she said, 50 million? Like, how much more do you need?
Mhm.
And he's, I don't know. She's like, what else could you buy if you had more than $50 million? So
Mhm.
it's just this idea of that's what the pursuit of money is. When do you have enough? And
Mhm.
most people who are pursuing it to that level will never have enough,
Right.
right? Some countries who have like the lowest paid employee,
Mhm.
it's just like that. Again, how much do you want to take advantage of your
Right.
workers?
Yeah.
Do you have
Yeah.
to make 1,000 times what they make?
Mhm.
It just goes back to some people think that kind of money is just money hoarding. right? Like it's turned into a disease. So it's just thinking about like how much money is enough money for one person to have. You know?
Yeah, and I could definitely see an issue with that, and I personally think that's also a separate issue. Certain people not feeling there there's ever enough, right? And they have their own
Yeah.
issues to work through for sure. So there is that aspect. Now, do you feel then this view around capitalism and taxing people, one of the things I see, and I touched on it earlier when we first started, is it does create a disruption within society too, where the wealthy are looked upon as evil people. And then there's that, again, there's that sense of divide and perhaps even resentment within society. Do you also feel that can happen? And I feel like it's happening already for a while.
Um, Again, so let's look at the record.
Hmm.
So in the US, I can't speak for any other country, but
Yeah.
in the US, um, we passed, our Supreme Court made a decision called Citizens United, and it
Hmm.
says that corporations can donate unlimited amounts of money to campaigns. I can't do that. I can
Hmm.
only donate $2,700 to
Mm.
any campaign. So since then, corporations have put hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, through PACs that have no accountability. We
Right.
don't know who's getting what from whom. And how is that how are we a democracy still?
Hmm.
Number
Hmm.
one, that's clearly undemocratic.
Right.
Okay, but we did it, and it's been in place for years,
Hmm.
and no one has been able to get rid of it. There's that, and just the power that corporations have in our country. I even feel like my vote doesn't count anymore
Hmm.
because of that.
Right.
So it has changed the complete dynamics of our country to where many normal citizens here feel
Mhm.
completely helpless.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So the other piece there, and I think you touched on it, was, if I'm understanding correctly, you're also saying that a lot of these powerful corporations, because of the influence they have through their money, are influencing the policies that the parties are also putting forward.
Yes, I was actually going to go there and I forgot my train of thinking. Yes, so they literally buy our politicians.
Hmm.
And then our politicians put in place new laws and regulations specifically designed to benefit those corporations. At this point, I feel both of our parties are major parties. We have minor parties, but
Hmm.
they are sabotaged by the major parties.
Hmm.
Yeah, but both our major political parties are completely beholden to corporations.
Hmm.
Completely.
Right.
And with few exceptions.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. So the other piece you touched on was there, and I know you use Europe as an example, that there is an aspect of, and obviously Europe's still figuring their stuff out too, but there is an aspect where you can find a healthy balance and you can use some aspects of socialism. What are these aspects that you think we can incorporate and see some benefits?
Yeah, we already have a few things that are socialist, like our postal system. We have a thing called Social Security,
Mm.
and it was put into place so people, old people, don't starve to death or whatever. But unfortunately, like our wages, it has not increased enough to make a substantive difference now to people when they retire. And pair that with the fact that a lot of companies used to have pensions. And now we don't really have that kind of company anymore, at least in the US.
Mm.
But Social Security is social if we could just have it keep up with what people's actual expenses are. And then we have kind of, it's centralized now, but it still doesn't really work the best way. It could have, Obama could have put in a single payer option, but he apparently bowed to pressure from probably the insurance industry
Mm.
and didn't end up doing that, to
Mm.
our great disappointment.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what else we have that's, or what else Europe has that's like that. I think they just take care of people better. I think in the UK, anyone who's homeless is given a place to live.
Mm.
I'm pretty sure I read that the other day. So we definitely don't do that, even though it would probably be cheaper to do that
Mm.
than just here we make it illegal to sleep in public, right? Because
Mhm.
we're terrible people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you can get arrested for that if you do that. So, way to make a homeless person's life better by arresting them. That's great.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot of things we could do here. It just it would probably save us money, and it's also just nicer.
Mhm.
We could be a lot nicer here. And I will say, I think it's harder. I think it's harder to make that kind of change here because we're so big,
Mhm.
right? In a much smaller country, you guys might have the same issue. You're big and spread out.
Yeah.
But in France, if people are unhappy, they're like half the country will go on strike, right? And almost immediately something will change.
Right.
But we don't have that kind of unity here,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like we are a bunch of different countries. There's the Northeast and the South and Texas and California is like their own country and the Midwest. And
Yeah.
so it's really hard to make change on the federal level because of
Right.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Now, do you feel like socialism can also go too far? And we have some examples in the last 100 years, but I do want to get your thoughts on that as well.
That any system is only as good as the people running it. Capitalism is bad because rich people are running it. Rich people who are only interested in their own self-interest, right? So socialism, communism, it's all the same thing. If you have a
Mhm.
corrupt leader, it's going to be corrupt no matter what it is.
Mhm.
And I feel like almost every system eventually gets corrupt,
Mhm.
right? Because
Right.
when people get power, I think power corrupts. You get
Yes.
all this power and it goes to your head and then you just want more and
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah.
And it's no different than the monarchies, right? Because there's a lot, if you look at it, even
Yeah.
there, those in.
I went to Cuba in 2017 and I stayed in an Airbnb. And even though they didn't speak much English, I speak some Spanish. I was able to talk to my hosts, and they didn't even think all the parts of their government were bad. And now they are starting to get a little capitalism down there. If you have a nice apartment, you can Airbnb it. I think you can still do that. And so we talked about if we just take a little bit of your government, a little bit of my government, make a much better government,
Mhm.
because we have too much capitalism. Capitalism has too much control over our government, I should say.
Mhm. Mhm. Do you feel then this is just an aspect of our existence where we go through these ebbs and flows and these swings slowly over time? Obviously, if you take a snapshot of where we are today, then it seems okay, we're stuck in this rut potentially. But over time, if you took a larger view, eh, then you're probably seeing a bit of a shift happening.
The problem with that shift
Yeah.
that I'm sure is coming is I
Mhm.
do not think it's going to be fun in any way
Yeah.
because I do think the US is just, I feel like, can only collapse. That's what the earth is doing because we are using too much of its resources and polluting the atmosphere too much. So I don't really know what the next phase looks like, but I will say this even if it's bad, I believe in people. And
Mhm.
so I think ultimately people will take care of each other through whatever the transition is, no
Mhm.
matter how bad it is. I think, and that's part of my book. It's we need to stop fighting with all these people who we think are different than us because they really aren't,
Right.
and realize that if we all work together, not only can we fight some of these bad
Mhm.
forces at play, but we can take care of each other,
Mhm.
right? When those forces do bad things.
Yeah. Yeah, and to your point, I think we get told that we're all different, which creates
Yeah.
the problem, right? And with that being said too, then who decides what the bad forces are, right? That also becomes an issue.
Well, I think it's easy to see.
Mhm.
It's definitely corporate interests who don't care about us, right?
Mhm.
Which is pretty obvious in so many different ways that we've already talked about. Mm, And if our government is captured by that, then they're in on part of it too. Again, they've got control of many things and they enforce the laws, many of which were written by corporations. If you're not in charge of any of that, you're probably not part of the problem.
And the other thing you touched on was the Earth's resources and how the role we've played. Where do you think the issue is with that? Because I've heard both sides of the argument, right? There's the concern around climate, and then on the other side, there's the world's energy needs are continuing to grow. We're growing in population, we're slowing down on that front, but we're still growing. So the energy needs continue to grow. So where do you draw that line?
Well, here's the thing.
Hmm.
We can do whatever we want, but it doesn't change physics. So it's fine. You can say we can't stop producing energy because we need it, but eventually we will. We definitely will, because either there will be so many natural disasters that things will just be destroyed all the time, or we'll just run out of stuff, right? It's, I don't think there is a good answer for that, because even solar has serious issues, right? And like, how would you make the solar panels? You would use solar to make the solar panels. Anyway, I don't think anything that involves 8 billion people is sustainable. That's where I'm at with that. People who say it's too expensive to adjust now have never seen the bill for a crazy hurricane in Florida. It's so much cheaper to adjust now than it is to clean up these from these horrible natural disasters. And there's proof. Anyone who says that it's more expensive now has never looked at a single number. So I'm not really worried about the earth. It's just humans that will get rid of themselves. So if people don't want to face that and just want to keep going the way we are, that's cool. A lot of species have gone extinct. So
Yeah.
I try not to get too hung up on that, because I don't think anything short of a miracle will make the system that is currently in place stop doing what they're doing.
So you don't feel that we
I shouldn't say that. After a few generations, I think younger people are much smarter than us. So after a few, and they care more about that stuff because they know they're going to be more impacted from it. So if there's still time, I think they might fix it. But I definitely don't think the people older than me are going to fix it. For the most part. Not that there's no good people that are older than me.
So you said that with the 8 billion people population, it's not sustainable. Is that just because of the demand of energy, or just the sheer number?
Right. Like, we're going to switch to electric cars. Making 8 billion electric cars is still going to ruin the planet. So there's no scenario that involves making a thing for 8 billion people that is not just going to make everything worse. Like, it would obviously be better to create more walkable, bikeable cities that don't require cars, so that instead of switching people to electric, we're switching people out of cars. Right? Because manufacturing is very energy intensive.
Yeah, and with electric vehicles too, we don't know we're going to dispose the batteries, because that's still
and making the batteries is horrible for the planet. Just getting the materials, and often it's in a conflict zone where people are dying for us to get these materials, or we're just stealing them. It's really pretty bad all around. But yeah, so I don't know. I only know the answer is less, not switching from one thing to another. It's less of everything. It's not going back to the Stone Age, but it's learning to do things manually without electricity. So I like espresso. I like lattes. And so I went on Facebook once and asked my friends, what is the least technical way to make a latte? And so I ended up buying an AeroPress, which is this plastic thing with a plunger. And you do have to heat up the water, but after that, you just pour it in this plunger with the espresso, and then you push the plunger through and you get a shot of espresso. It's being creative. There's innovation in technology, but there's also sometimes technology doesn't involve electricity. And I think that's what we have to focus on is how can we do things? How can we use our creativity, all our big brains, to learn how to do things manually? And I haven't even, so we can talk about AI and crypto, and the fact that Elon Musk's new AI facility will use 1 million gallons of water a day in electricity usage. When I saw that, I'm just like, humans aren't serious about protecting our species.
Right. Yeah.
And then crypto also uses a ton of electricity, right? And to me, serves no purpose at all in the world. right?
Mhm.
AI at least serves a purpose.
Right.
Like crypto serves no purpose except to make people money.
Mhm.
No other purpose. And to use electricity, which also makes people money, and to make a small group of people money.
Right.
So again, we've put money above the human species. So
Mhm.
that's fine if that's what you want to do. There's a result to that and we will get there.
Yeah. Yeah. But I guess one thing I'm curious to also explore with you is because you said the younger generation does care because they're the ones who are going to get impacted. But I
Yeah.
also see, especially as a father, the younger generation is also the least manual intensive, right?
Well,
Kind of generation because they're so used to everything being,
right.
just growing up for me too, riding a bicycle or whatever. Now you've got electric bikes and all that. So you do see a lot of shift in with the upcoming generation. I don't know how they go back because they don't even know any different.
You got to teach them how to read a map and all those things that you learned how to do
Right.
when you were young. I feel like they would be adaptable. Obviously, that's what they grew up with. Maybe it's maybe I go back to what I grew up with,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I also just know that I don't want to use any more electricity than I have to.
Mhm.
Not because of the cost to my wallet,
Mhm.
but because of the cost to the planet, right?
Yeah, for sure. I do want to understand because I know for you, a lot of this, you're obviously passionate about it, but it's also come at a personal cost. Like you've been involved in certain situations. Are you able to speak?
I don't think so. I
Okay.
don't really I hang out with a lot of activists.
Yeah.
At this point, if someone is not interested in my message,
Hmm.
then they won't be attracted to anything else I'm doing, but that's okay with me because I think enough people are that
Yeah.
I'm going to be okay.
Okay. Okay. So there's nothing that
Yeah.
you had to deal with personally from being an activist or just speaking up against some of these things.
No, I don't think so. I don't
Okay.
remember what I would have said about that, but
Okay.
no, not that I can think of at the moment.
But is that so I know you've addressed it in a way, but is that a concern of yours or a fear? Do you ever think about it or doesn't really matter at this point?
No, I don't think so. And again, I think enough other people share this
Mhm.
sentiment that it's a pretty big group of people at this point,
Mhm. Right.
especially in the US. It's such a huge issue here.
For sure. Yeah. No, I definitely agree. It's definitely and obviously more people are speaking up and trying to do their part. So I definitely see that. Now, you've talked about your bit book. So for listeners that want to find some of your work, what are some ways they can do that?
So for this book, there's actually has its own webpage. It's howtofindjoybook.com. You can also search for my name on Amazon or bookshop.org, which I prefer because it's not Amazon. But either one you can find me on. So those are the main ways um,
Right. No,
to
that's great.
find
Yeah,
information about the book and about me.
for sure. We'll put that in the show notes. But Elsie, thank you so much for your time and having this conversation with me and sharing a lot of the information and your views. I definitely appreciate that. So thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great.